Well, good evening, everyone. First, I want to thank you for taking a little time out of another beautiful June night to be with us. My name is Peter Light. I'm the Superintendent of Schools, and it's my pleasure to be able to provide this update to the community with regard to our building project. As I said, it's a beautiful night out, so we'll try and be efficient with our time and have a good opportunity at the end to answer any questions that you might have. One of the important aspects of the school building project is our work with the MSBA, which is the Massachusetts School Building Authority. It's a governmental agency that partners with local school districts to provide funding for large-scale capital projects. Just to put it in perspective, it's about 1 penny on the dollar from the state's 6.5% sales tax that funds the MSBA projects all across the state. And the way the MSBA program works, it provides a reimbursement rate to school districts who meet certain criteria for eligibility for the various projects that MSBA is willing to fund. And so what we know about MSBA is to provide a maximum allowance for the grant as a percentage of your reimbursement, but there are always costs that MSBA considers as non-reimbursable costs to a project. So it's not that every penny of what a community may need to spend on a building is absolutely reimbursed. We know that the actual reimbursement or the effective reimbursement rate is different from the actual reimbursement rate. So it's just something important to consider. Just to give you a little timeline of how we got to this point, back in 2015-16, the district engaged an architectural firm, Dorr & Whittier, to conduct a master planning feasibility study of all of its facilities, which led to a comprehensive set of improvements required to the facilities across the district. As the top 3 priorities in that, there were identified 3 buildings in need of major renovation or replacement. Those 3 buildings were the Douglas Elementary School, the Gates Elementary School, and the Conant Elementary School. As a result of that, the district submitted statements of interest to MSBA to enter into its program for potential reimbursement, and we were accepted to begin a feasibility study, which is what we are currently working under and just about finished up with. The purpose of the feasibility study was to determine which of the facilities we would choose to proceed with and what was our preferred option for this first project. During the original visioning process that the district engaged in through Dorr & Whittier, there was extensive community visioning that was done with a number of different community surveys, forums. That happened as well last year in similar fashion, and the overwhelming response from the community was to proceed with a multi-building or multi-school solution to the problem. And so what we have proceeded with was the preferred option to replace the C.T. Douglas Elementary School, but to consolidate the building also with the Gates Elementary School and to build a preschool in addition, because none of those facilities currently meet current educational requirements that the district has. Throughout the year, we've begun to explore the various options, looking at the site plans, site constraints that we have, the various opportunities that take place. We studied the Conant site, and we also studied the Gates site and the Douglas site. I'm going to have Emily come forward and talk to that a little bit. And so what we do know before she speaks is that we are finishing the process of the feasibility study now. We'll be going into a phase called schematic design, and Emily will talk more to that. We expect that that will be finished in early fall, and then we will have an MSBA board meeting in late October where they will vote the final approval for our project, provide us the final funding formula that we can rely on as a community to know what's reimbursable by the state, and then that will trigger a 120-day opportunity for us to have both communities support votes to be able to fund the project. So we're anticipating that that vote timeline would take place in mid-December. So we'll have more on that at the end, but without further ado, I'm going to introduce Emily Grandstaff-Rice, who is the project lead from Arrow Street, which is the architectural design firm that we've been working with. And Emily's going to talk to you a little bit more about how we got here and how we're going to finish this project by September of '22.
Thank you. Good evening. So, as Peter said, I am an architect. I work for Arrow Street. Just a little background about us. We are a 95-person firm. We're in Boston. We do all different types of projects, but I exclusively work in schools because for me, schools marries sort of it's the creative side of getting to solve and work with communities like you on unique problems, but it also is sort of a feel-good thing for me knowing that the work that we do has impact long beyond just us standing up here at community meetings and all of the other stuff that goes into it. So a little bit of process stuff, and I'll get into what the new building is going to look like and some of the thoughts behind how we got where we are. So the MSBA does a whole bunch of very regimented sections. We're in feasibility studies, so it's really about making sure your site is good, it's buildable, it has the requirements that it needs. I've been to the schools many times, both Conant, Douglas, and Gates. We wrote a really big report. We submitted it to the MSBA, and they will be voting on approving the feasibility study on June 26th. So as part of that, we did a whole bunch of studies. What would the building look like? What size the building should be? I know that the community has always felt that this should be a twin school solution, bringing Douglas and Gates and the preschool into the same building. The MSBA wasn't as convinced, not because they had any sort of great reason, but that's their job. They want to make sure that the choices that you go forward with are validated and you're really sure of where you go. So we did a whole bunch of configurations and selected Douglas and Gates are technically the same parcel, but we selected sort of the Gates side of it to build the new building. So right now we will be going from the preferred solution to schematic design, and that's why we're starting to look at things such as what's the mechanical system going to be? What is the plumbing system going to be? How do we make sure that the buses and the cars and all of these other things that we have to fit into the building, as well as the different spaces that those 3 school programs have, because each of them is unique, fit in the building and make sure that we have space for all of that other stuff. Meanwhile, also maximizing our reimbursable spaces for the state. So that's just a really quick overview of what we're working on. As Peter said, we will be submitting the schematic design to the state in mid-September for a late October approval. And then after the state approves that, that's when we will go for a vote in both towns, in Acton and Boxborough. So now we get to the fun part, at least for me, which is the site. So one of the things that struck us about the site, even when we were interviewing for this job, was frankly how beautiful it is. There are a lot of natural resources. There's Fort Pond Brook that bisects the parcel with Douglas and Gates on either side. A lot of green space. It looks like there's a lot of land to build on. I'll show in your next slide that there's also a lot of environmental constraints that we have to work with. I think what has been unique about this has been how can we maximize the space that you have, and also, you see this space over here, this is where we will be building the new school. We decided early on that it doesn't make sense necessarily to have the students go to a temporary school or a temporary space, because frankly, sometimes you call those swing spaces, right? There aren't any here. So the goal is to have the students stay in the Douglas School and the Gates School while the construction happens. There's going to be some constraints and sort of some things that we'll have to work through while that happens, always making sure that the safety of the students is priority. But that's the plan, to build the new school adjacent to the existing Gates School. And then when the new school is operational, then decommission the Gates and the Douglas School. So this is a site plan showing where the new footprint would be, here in this sort of salmon color. The existing Gates School is here. You can just see the outline of the existing Douglas School on this side. All of the different rainbow colors that are going across this are environmental constraint lines that we are tracking. So there's really 3 major things that I want to impart are important on this site. Number 1, we have to follow the FEMA floodplain, right? We're next to a body of water. We know it floods. And beyond that, we know we need to go beyond that, because There is a lot of water on the site, and making sure that whatever we build is resilient and not vulnerable to any flooding. So that's something that we're watching a lot. As well as we have documented wetlands on the site. So when the two schools were built in 1965 and 1967, the Wetlands Protection Act didn't exist, right? So there are some areas where the building is actually really close to existing wetlands. Knowing that, we're making sure that we will adhere to the existing setbacks for the wetlands. So if the wetland line is, again, I'm always trying to remember which color is which. But let's say the wetland line is here, we have to make sure that we stay at least 75 feet away from it. And anything beyond that, within 100 feet, we have to have notification of Conservation Commission. The third thing that's important to remember about the site is about the body of water. So because we have an active waterway, we also need to respect a 100-foot and a 200-foot riverfront area zone. And there's different regulations about that. So that really helped us figure out where the buildable space was on this site. And if you consider that Gates is right here, it's actually a lot tighter than you think. So one could say, well, this is a really big constraint. Sure, but it's also a great opportunity because at the end of the day, you will still have a lot of green space around the building, and it preserves the natural resources that you have, and frankly ensures that we have a really resilient building that will not only work for today, but will work for various weather conditions that are predicted in the future. So, yeah. Good point. Yeah, so you're talking specifically about this orange line. Yeah, so that's a 200-foot riverfront area. So we're allowed to build within the riverfront area as long as it is better than, there's a couple different regulations, so let me see if I can walk this through. The bigger picture is you can't do worse than the existing condition, if that makes sense. So that's sort of the overall picture. You can build on a previously developed site, which is this site, up to 10% of the site area within the riverfront area zone. So yes, some of this building is within the 100 to 200 riverfront area zone, and we've talked to the Conservation Commission about that, and we're documenting it, but we have the ability to build up to 30,000 square feet in the riverfront area, and right now we're showing about 6,000. No, it's really to protect the riverbanks from overdevelopment. In an urban area with a much higher population, you can actually build much closer to the riverfront, but in Acton, the regulation here is 200 feet. And it's really just to make sure that people don't build right up against waterways. But that's a great catch. Yeah. And please stop me if I talk too fast. For me, this is kind of internalized. So this is sort of a snapshot to what the site will look like, and these are still schematic. We're working through a lot of these issues. As you may know, the existing bus traffic comes off of a drive off of Arlington Street. We're actually going to maintain that because we've heard from the community that buses on Spruce Street is an issue, especially with some of the traffic around the post office. So the idea is the buses would come along here and have a bus turnaround and would exit on Arlington Street. Vehicular traffic would come off of Spruce Street, and there is a parking lot here on the gate side. By zoning, we need to have 240 parking spots. We can't fit them all on gates, and for a couple reasons. One, we need to build a new septic field for the new school. The existing one is actually located under where we will be building the school. And also the septic is based on the number of students that you have. And because the existing Gates School is essentially getting larger, and like building official-wise, a much larger population, we actually need to build a larger field. And it will be located here in the corner of the site. So some of the parking will be on the Gates side, some of the parking will be on the Douglas side, and that we will be rebuilding the boardwalk so that it is larger to fit, number one, so there will be rails on both sides, but also would be ADA accessible through pathways down from the parking lots on either side. There are some other things that we need to consider on the boardwalk in terms of how that works with the Army Corps of Engineers, who's the permitting entity on that, as well as working with the Conservation Commission, because we know there is a lot of wildlife on Fort Brook, and how that works through. We are proposing 3 different playgrounds. So one for the K through 12, that would have a fence. K through 2, thank you. So the smaller group. One that would have a fence around it, protected, as well as one for, let's say, 3 through 4, and one for older kids. So that as kids go through the various grades and get more advanced in playground acrobatics, let's say, that there are developmentally appropriate areas for them. The front door will be here by the bus drop-off, but also accessible to the parent drop-off, and also vans. Let's see, what else? We know there's walkers. Yeah, go ahead. Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
So actually, well, I mean, you want to clarify,
Well, I was just going to say, there's no sort of, any grade can go to any playground, but we will have a playground for younger students. And so there won't be a dedicated preschool playground, but it's more for the younger kids.
Actually, just clarification.
Sure.
Top left playground.
Yeah.
Pre-K through 1.
Okay.
So it really is.
Yeah. Where the existing gates is, there will be parking. No, we'll have transitional parking. In the meantime, we're trying to work through where it will be.
You're being recorded. We're on ActonTV, which you should have told me. So we're going to take questions, but we're going to ask people to actually ask them at the mic so that people who watch the video can hear them. So
Okay.
if we can hold as any clarifying questions right now, and then we'll open it up to whatever questions you have.
Okay. So we know that the natural landscape is incredibly important, so we're starting to look through sort of what would this look like, and we want to incorporate as many natural features so that it doesn't feel like it's, that it works with what we know of Acton and Boxborough, as well as provide some opportunities for outdoor classrooms or amphitheaters or places to sit around the building. So this is just sort of this is like our own version of Pinterest, or sort of character imagery of what we would use for the landscape. And so that I can get to questions, I'll just keep going through the plans. So the main entry is here, where you see the mouse. And what we will have is 2 separate administrations, one for Douglas and one for Gates. The one for Gates happens to be on the left side, the one for Douglas would be on the right side. And what you're seeing in here as this sort of C shape is what we're calling the Learning Commons. And this is a place where they will be surrounded by risers that can allow informal groups, small but also large, to be able to sit. And it's basically a gathering space. What we know of the first floor is that we'll have some shared spaces. So it's not just one school, it's going to be where all the different schools are coming together. We had a lot of conversations about whether there should be a Douglas dedicated entrance or a Gates dedicated entrance. Based on Parker Damon, we know there's some advantages and disadvantages to that, but we decided that it's actually better to have one door with both administrations immediately adjacent. At the upper end, up here, this is where the preschool program will be. This red color here is showing a preschool entry. So the preschool program will have its own dedicated entry off of the parking lot. And what you're seeing are 9 preschool classrooms. And I'm actually going to go a little bit into depth about that in a minute. We also have 2 CASE special education collaborative classrooms. This space and this space are something that is actually sort of not necessarily a new thing to learning, but a new thing on the MSBA reimbursable side, where they're actually going to encourage districts like Acton Boxborough to include STEAM laboratories. So this is to celebrate STEM education. Sometimes these are makerspace, whatever, but these are flexible spaces. Knowing the importance of these, actually keeping them on the ground floor, so they're open to the space so that activity can come out and spill out into the hallway. The green 2 spaces here are multi-purpose rooms. This is something very similar to what happens at Parker Damon. Sometimes you need extra space for a larger project or a gathering. So that's what these 2 green spaces are here. These spaces here, so the lighter green, are 2 gymnasiums. So we know one of the things that was sort of a learning point from Parker Damon is they currently have one 6,000 square foot gymnasium, so that's this larger one here. That is shared by the 2 schools, and it becomes problematic with scheduling, with the curtain in the middle. So the MSBA has actually agreed, based on the school population, to have one 6,000 square foot gym and one 3,000 square foot gym. Right now, the smaller one will be targeted for preschool to grade 1, and the larger one would be grades 2 to 6. And both of the schools will share those 2. This larger orange area is the cafeteria. Here's the kitchen. So right now we have designed a cafeteria with performance spaces on either side. We know that there are some programming issues between different productions and band and all of this sort of stuff off of the cafeteria. We're also looking at the opportunity to have some smaller breakout rooms off of it for children who have sensory issues in a larger cafeteria setting. So that's a very quick overview of the first floor. There will be a main stair right beside the Learning Commons, and that main stair will take you up to the second floor. The idea behind how this building will stack is that the Gates School will be all of the second floor, and that the Douglas School will be all of the third floor. And by having the main stair in the center, it's the connector between the 2. And it surrounds this green space here, which will be the Media Center Library. There was a lot of discussion whether the Media Center should be on the ground floor, on the upper floor. We decided that one of the best ways to make it equitable would actually have it span the second and third grade floor, so it's a double height space. So both of the schools are actually connected through the library. And we can show you some imagery on that. The MSBA Space Summary Template provides for 3 sections per grade, with the exception of kindergarten, which based on your student population is actually 4. That's really nice because that provides some flexibility in this if there's ever a classroom with a bubble or an extra section, right? The way we've laid it out, and I think this is something that, and one way it's almost kind of a labeling exercise, but kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. You might see some of these smaller rooms in between the classrooms. Those are for small group breakouts, and so they're either for special education, for sensory, for speech and language, for learning centers. There are also some other tier 2 intervention rooms for reading, math, and other things. And so why are those important to have near the classrooms? It minimizes travel time and it allows for a more seamless integration of services. There's also resource program rooms on each floor. They will have a music room and an art room. I kind of breezed through this, so I'm. How long are the hallways? They're pretty long. They're like 250 to 300 feet long. So they're long hallways. This is a big building. So the third floor is very similar to the second floor, with the exception of that the media center is a portion of it, looking down on the second floor, and that the gym roofs, because there are only 2 floors, double height, they don't have the footprint of the gym on the third floor of Douglas. So this is sort of a diagram of the exterior of the building. You can see that we stack the program vertically. So we've got the preschool, grades 3 and 4, music, art, the gym. This is looking from the Douglas side over, grades 5 and 6, the cafetorium, the cafe auditorium, media center 1, 2, and preschool. And this is a much cleaner diagram where you can see on the ground floor it's common space, on the second floor it's gates, and the third floor it's Douglas. Just to talk through the preschool program a little bit, the preschool program is on the ground floor to ensure that we knew that with younger kids it made sense for them to be in the lower of the building. And as I mentioned, sort of the small breakout rooms, 2 speech and language, as well as a sensory. One of the things that the preschool program currently doesn't have is a nurse in the building. So the nurse will be located on the first floor, close to preschool, and they will also be close to the OT-PT room for those services. The building has 2 elevators. I get asked that a lot. 2 elevators, as well as there are 3 sets of stairs. The capacity for the stairs is built. It can handle 1,000 people per floor. You'd never have 1,000 people per floor. Maximum population is more around 575 for each floor. So we've overbuilt the stairs to handle capacity. And this is a diagram. This one has a lot of words, so bear with me. But if you sort of look at it, it shows the distribution of special education throughout the building. It's not set in one corner. It really, reinforces the district's policy towards inclusion and push-in services and integrating these, not just for special education, but for, frankly, everybody, for teachers and for students. This is a image of what the front would look like. We have built an area out over the door on the ground floor, knowing that if it's raining, if it's inclement weather, there's a lot of sort of a porch. It's basically the front door is recessed in here, so that there's a porch out over the door, as well as similar to the preschool area. This is a view from the parking lot, looking at it. Looking back at the building, this is showing the preschool entry here with the main entry on the right. So what we're trying to do here is break down the scale of the building. There's actually very few areas where you see all 3 floors at once. What we've done is we've tried to play with the facade so that you see 2 floors and the porch area below, or on this side, having brick on the lower 2 floors and a different material above, so that you don't get the sense that it's sort of a 3-story wall in your face. This is a close-up image of what we're imagining for the front door. What we know is that we need to do some work to ensure that the schools are easily identifiable, that kids feel like there's ownership of the space, and that this is a place that they belong to, and also that this is a larger community of not just one school or the other. So there's kind of a little bit of a design challenge as we go through it. We're also trying to play with some of the historical references of sort of a warehouse building or mill building in this area. It's difficult to recreate some of the more finer sort of colonial details on this because it is such a larger building, and so we're working with the school building committee to try and figure out sort of what's the right messaging for the exterior building, but also make sure that it feels like it's part of the community. This is actually, so I always laugh when I see this blue, but imagine that's 4 Point Brook. It's much more green. This is actually looking back on it. So some of the more modern elements in terms of what the cafetorium would look like or the media center are actually on the inside of the building. And so I think this is an opportunity for us to have a more modern expression. What we're showing here are the ability to have some garage doors or larger doors off of the cafetorium, so that when the weather is nice, you can open it up for fresh air, as well as in the library to have sort of a really nice view to maximize what we believe is sort of one of the most amazing things about this site, which is looking out over the water. This is a shot interior of what a concept of the Learning Commons. It's a larger space where, again, as I mentioned, the students could gather. This is a view of the stair coming up that wraps around the media center that then takes you to Douglas and Gates. This is rough, so bear with us, but we're starting to imagine what the space would look like from the upper portion of the library media center, looking out over, and again, making sure that we have these connections to the land in the spaces that we have. And I think the other challenging thing, and you can sort of see it here in this library, more so for younger kids, is that when you design a library, you want to make sure that there's spaces for small groups, not just sort of a big open space, because libraries are used in a multitude of ways. So this is sort of a finer rendering. We're working through this. Again, we're in the really early stages. We've got a lot of design to go. I'll be the first to admit that. But we feel like we've been able to get the building to a place where we know that we have all the spaces, they're approximately the right size, and also starting to build the systems into it. The next step for us to do is to get a robust estimate, and that's part of the process in the early stage, to really sort of see where we are cost-wise. So to share with you some of the numbers that we have so far, so there's the construction price, but then there's also sort of all the soft costs that go into this. The early estimated cost that we did a feasibility study is between $120 and $130 million. And then the MSBA reimbursement rate, we were estimating it from around 35 to 45%. There's sort of a complicated formula. Well, they'll pay for some things and won't others. There's an 8% site cap, et cetera, et cetera. We were estimating that would be between $40 and $60 million. We just got word from the state that we were actually eligible for some additional reimbursement based on our operational and maintenance, as well as some of our sustainability measures. So that number right now is trending upward, more around 48, 49%. But again, we're sort of early, so that's why I'm a little hesitant to put exact numbers out there. So the estimated share to Acton Boxborough would be around $70 and $80 million. And so that has various impacts, right, on Acton and what that property increase would be, as well as Boxborough, because of the distributed percentages between the two towns. So that was a lot of information, and I tried to do it as quickly as possible so I could answer your questions. So.
So I am going to ask, I hate to do this, but if we don't seem to have a portable mic, so if you have questions, you can come up here and ask them for all of Acton and Boxborough to see you and hear you. Don't be shy, we love your questions.
Thanks so much. That was super helpful. So I am a mom with little kids that'll be coming in. So I have a couple questions, but maybe I'll just start with the playgrounds. I've been hearing so much about how nature is important, and you mentioned you might have some natural elements, but could you speak to, are you designing the playgrounds? Would they be integrated with nature at all, or can you expand upon that intersection?
Yeah, so we're in the very early stages, so bear with me. We work with a really talented landscape architect out of Arlington called Terra Inc., and they have worked with us on various schools. And so their concept, because water is so integral to the site, is actually to, and they even sort of labeled it here, for the younger kids, they're calling it the puddles. The middle kids, it's the springs, and the third would be the rivers. And so to mark so these developmental stages as you go through. And these are pretty big playgrounds right now. They're estimating around like 7,000 square feet, which is on par with what you have now, or even a little bit bigger. I mean, things will change, but that's sort of what we're playing with. We imagine them to have some combination of, let's say, traditional playground equipment, but there's different styles in which you can do that, right? You could have the very primary color type ones, or there's a lot of ones, the Esplanade in Boston is a great example of ways in which you can have a climbing structure, but also sort of fits with the natural landscapes because it's made out of natural materials or wood or blends in. So I can't speak to the playground equipment specifically because we're still working on it, But what I can talk about is a mixture of materials. So hard materials, greenery, as well as this is an example of what they call low-mow grass. So choosing different types of grass type that have different sort of reliefs for different tactile experiences, as well as incorporating perhaps some planting beds for educational experience. This is a great example of some of the naturalistic playgrounds you already have. So every school, I think, got a playground grant from the CPC to work through like various rocks and climbing. So a playground doesn't necessarily have to be manufactured. Sometimes natural elements in unique placement can provide the risk and the challenge that children enjoy. One of the things that we're very excited about is the opportunity, because the land slopes down towards the water, the opportunity to have an amphitheater or type of an outdoor seating space. Yeah, of course.
So as Emily said, one of the things that we currently have our community used CPC funds to put in natural playgrounds at each of our elementary schools. As part of that commitment that we make back to CPC, through this project, we would either be replicating or enhancing the natural playground spaces at each of the schools. That's something that when you take the CPC funds, you're agreeing to continue that. We have, we're in the process of evaluating the various pieces of equipment that we received through those grants, and anything that's usable will certainly be reused, and if it can't be reused, it would be replicated.
So my colleague Manish is in the back. He's a dual threat. He's a Acton resident and he works for Arrow Street. Which one are you representing tonight? Okay, good.
Hi, am I supposed to identify myself like we do at town? Anyway,
I'd like to know who you are.
Deborah Symes.
Nice to meet you.
I'm Manish's next door neighbor.
Awesome.
Also, I'm here as myself. I'm also here a little bit in part as president of Green Acton. So 2 quick things first. One is, this is obviously going to be a huge amount of parking. Are you guys at the point of talking about what kind of surfaces?
Absolutely.
Talk to me.
Yes. So I don't have I don't have it with me.
Yeah.
Oh, actually I do. Take that back. So I don't know if you see there's sort of a purple and a gray. So one of the things that we have to track on this site is our percentage of pervious and impervious, right? Because we need to make sure that we're tracking both the quality and the quantity of water runoff. So there are currently no contemporary measures on this site. So we will definitely be collecting stormwater runoff, right, to make sure that we can account for my civil engineer could like rattle off the numbers off the top of his head, but that's something that we're tracking as well as we are making sure that we don't, or we minimize any land work below the 205 line, because that is the estimated flood area of the water. Okay, so the gray and the purple are designating where we would use pervious pavement versus impervious. So the gray would be impervious pavement. So here's a great example. One of the issues with impervious, it works great. You've got examples already here in town. But when you have large vehicles like buses on the turnaround, it tends to sort of score it, and you can see that happening. So what we would like to do is a hybrid. So then the parking spaces themselves, would be impervious to allow for water to trickleate through. So we're doing kind of that's what we're proposing, hybrid, and we'll be able to meet the levels of infiltration that satisfy that. Can I add on to your question, even though you haven't asked it? So one of the challenges, actually I shouldn't say challenge, one of the opportunities that we have here that the district put before us is to also ensure that this is a net zero waste, water, energy. Yes. And what does that mean? That means that the building generates at least as much energy as it consumes in terms of water, right, to make sure that we treat the water that is, any water that you consume, you treat the same amount of water back. And waste, that's a little more complicated. Part of it has to do with sort of the physical waste, but because we are decommissioning two buildings, what we're really focusing on is the operational waste to make sure that either through the construction process, but also the operations, that the amount of waste that is generated through the building is minimized or is diverted from landfills. So there's some nuances to that. We're still working through what that means in terms of function and cost. So I'm keenly aware that these are things that we still need to work on, but we are proposing measures such as a geothermal heating system, right, to offset some of the energy for it, as well as photovoltaics, both on the roof and potentially also in the parking lot. So,
Awesome.
yeah, there's a lot of work being done and thinking about it. Do I have everything solved? No, but we're working on it.
So the aim is to actually do geothermal
Yes.
and to do the PV on the, just to repeat what you said, on roofs and potentially a canopy kind of situation in the parking lot.
Correct.
Cool. I just want to say yay, because it makes no sense to tie ourselves into this 19th century natural gas thing. So if I have to come up and repeat that, I will, but.
Thank you for your question.
Well, Mr. Speakers, I just love, like, some of us get excited about playgrounds, some of us get excited about impervious and pervious pavement. It's kind of fun.
Christina Richlick, this has been really neat to see how it's evolved. I have two quick questions. How is the existing Gates building going to function if the septic system is under where you're building the new building? And then how important to the design is it that the classrooms are clustered by grade? Or is that a school decision, or is it a design plan?
Good questions. So one of the very first things that's going to happen, and potentially if this goes forward and the votes pass, is that the first thing we do is build a new septic for Gates, right? Because Gates cannot be online without a septic system. And so the goal is in the summer of 2020, the new septic system goes in and we basically switch it over so then we can do some site work on the new building. So that's a really great question. And we realized that early, that that's one of the first pieces. And if that septic system for Gates is not in, Gates can't function. So that's one of the first things we do. In terms of the classrooms, I think there's been a lot of, I'm going to flip to the second floor. Frankly, there's been a lot of talk one way or another. The two schools actually do it differently. So, Gates is one of the schools where, and Lynn, you can sort of help me out. I don't know if Lynn's here tonight. They actually sort of mix grades, and there's some benefits to that. On one hand, it's a little bit of a labeling exercise, right? Because programmatically, the only classrooms that are unique are the preschool, and I'm just talking about the core classrooms, are preschool and kindergarten. Why? Because the state actually wants you to build a self-contained bathroom within that classroom. So they're slightly larger. They're programmed at about 1,200 square feet. But the core classrooms are programmed at 950 square feet, whether that's a first, second, third, fourth, fifth, or sixth. And so I think ultimately it comes down to the directive of the school leadership and where they would like the grades to go. We've designed it so that if you want to keep the grades together in groups of 3, you can do that. Of course.
Just to elaborate, because I think it actually begs the further question of how did we determine the overall school organization? We had a lot of conversations with both principals of Gates and Douglas, but then also conversations with the principals at McCarthytown and Miriam, so that not only were we understanding what the school communities at Gates and Douglas were hoping for, but also could learn some lessons learned from having already built this twin school idea. One thing that we came about with the current configuration where it's floors dedicated to schools as opposed to a left and right configuration, which is what we have at McCarthytown and Miriam. what we learned is that in the left-right configuration, when each school community is split over 2 and 3 floors, the schools felt like that actually broke down the sense of one community as a school. And so the principals came to us with an idea to keep it on 1 floor. But then that was also floated with the faculties and has been presented to the PTFs and PTOs at the schools to gain some feedback about. But I think the overall feeling was this had the best continuity. But I think because the classrooms are all alike, with the exception of those pre-K and kindergarten classrooms, this could easily be reconfigured in a number of ways as educational programs develop over time. I think one of the things that we're most aware of is that a building lifespan is at least 50 years. And so we understand that educational programs can change during that period of time, and whatever we design needs to be able to be flexibly configured so that it's not just useful for the first 10 years it's open.
My name is Pia. I have been in Acton for quite a long time. Can we go back to the site, the first site thing? I have 3 questions. I also work at McCarthy Town. I worked at the high school. My kids went through the whole school system, McCarthy Town starting, and we were part of the new building build. The question I had, first question is, at McCarthy Town and Merriam, the entrance is 2 doors. And it makes it easy for both schools to let people in for security reasons. And so I was wondering how you would address 2 schools coming into 1 door. Because every morning we're there and, we're letting people in or we're not. So that was my first question. My second question is, because I live right here, lives right here also.
Yeah.
What's this line going to be? I'm watching things and it seems like you're going to cut it pretty close to this line. Here's Spruce Street. Just wondering what is this all going to be taken down and rebuilt? And then the third question I had is, you're having a bridge from this parking area to this for people? A, what's that going to look like? And B, like when it snows, what happens to the snow? Because that's like on the other, you're going right through the wetlands or right through that water. So those are my 3 questions.
Yeah, okay. So let me start with the doors. So I think one of the concerns that we have heard with Parker Damon is, yes, the 2 doors work really well because there's only a certain capacity of parents and students you can learn, and the idea of one administration being able to keep track of 1,000 students was a little too much. But one of the downsides we also heard was that sometimes there's some confusion of what door to go to when you're not necessarily associated with one school. By having the 2 offices both have control on that one door, and we haven't figured out whether there's 2 bells or whatever, there's some redundancy. And they can capture people and basically be able to say to go one to the other. The administration and the teachers, there were some advantages to having one door. The MSBA also wanted us to push for one door too. So that's the theory that we're working on now. It's a large door, but by having the 2 administrations sort of double the eyes, we thought was better. I don't know if that helps address, please. Yeah, of course.
Before we go on to the others. So if you look at this main entrance, one of the things you're going to see that we don't have at Merriam McCarthy Town is a vestibule. That's a secure vestibule. So when someone comes to the main door of the building, they're able, is that?
You keep talking and I'll zoom in.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, so there we go, that's easier. So there's actually a vestibule where someone could get buzzed into one main area, but then they would actually have to go into their school office in order to check in and then exit through the school office into the rest of the building. What you're seeing is doors open right now. There's a couple doors missing that you're not seeing that go from the school office into the lobby, but the doors open in the lobby are really shown open only during the main times when students are coming in and out of the building at arrival and dismissal. But otherwise, it's a much more secure vestibule setup so that people can't gain access directly to the schools.
So, great
That was
question.
one.
Yeah. So, in terms of the site, I'm happy to meet you. Abutters are always incredibly important to the success of the project. So one of the things that we're trying to do is, this road currently curves a little bit, and so we're straightening it out, right? This is not wrong here, but I can tell you from a meeting today, we are not going to change anything beyond the property line. So the elevation change that we have will stay. What we will be doing is putting in a retaining wall to secure that edge, right? Because it looks a little painless right now, so there will be a retaining wall there to hold this back. What's not shown here is we're actually going to ensure that vehicles can't take a right to go down here, which is different than now. So there actually will be a barrier here, so that this will be exclusively buses, and this will be exclusively vehicles. If a fire truck or another emergency vehicle needs to get through, they actually get through at this point, right? So we're really memorializing the idea that large trucks and buses will be doing this road, and that vehicles will be doing this road. So hopefully that helps, because I know some of the concerns have been, what if the changes of the traffic? So I'm going to go one step further, which is, this road in here is where the service vehicles will come, right? So you're not going to have large trucks coming in here. They actually will take a turn. So any of the sort of the trash, the generator, kitchen deliveries will be in this area. There will be a security gate here, so during school hours, nobody can accidentally drive in here, because one of the advantages of having this large courtyard is there's actually an opportunity where kids can play during the day. That's very similar to how Pepper Dayton actually has been doing that. So it allows, if we put a security gate here, we can have a play area, especially during the winter, because it's voltage is good. So hopefully that addresses some of number two.
And just a couple quick other comments on number two. Based on a current analysis of transportation needs coming to the building, all of the students at Douglas and Gates are currently served by the same fleet of buses, so we're not adding any buses to the fleet coming into the new building. That's one comment I wanted to make, and they can actually all stack in that main area right out in front of the school. So we're not backing up onto Arlington Street. That was an important piece of the design. Second point I want to make in terms of, it leads into your discussion of the bridge between Douglas and Gates sites, but just one of the questions that we've had come up consistently is how far is it actually to walk from that Douglas parking lot over to the Gates site, because we are anticipating that we'll actually try to keep as many people dropping off on the Douglas site as possible to reduce traffic to Gates. Our Douglas parents have actually promised us that they will never take a bus again or drop off. There's only walking to school for Douglas. We've heard that loud and clear, and we're holding everyone accountable to that. But I do think that Elm Street, I do think we're trying to make Elm Street as convenient as possible for people as a drop-off location. The distance from the Elm Street parking lot where Douglas is currently located to the new school is roughly the same as it is to walk from the end of the Parker Damon parking lot to the Parker Damon building. So just to give a sense of scale, that will probably help people identify. The difference is you get to walk through some nice wetlands now.
Just to follow up on that, so when kids are coming and they actually
Yeah.
go over the bridge, do they still have to go to the front entrance to go in?
Yeah, so I think you've anticipated one of the things that we have going on here. So we will have a door adjacent to the cafeteria that will be staffed for kids to be able to come through. So the front door will be open during the usual sort of delivery time in the morning, as well as this door will be staffed. So they could enter in here. Once school hours occur, a visitor can only come to the main. And same thing with walkers. This actually allows you'll see some other doors along the front. This actually allows opportunity for staging for dismissal in a different way, as opposed to everybody just going out one. Good point. So I want to get back to their third point, which was about the bridge. So Peter talked about it. I think one of the things that we've recognized is that the current width of the bridge is not big enough, and there's only a railing on one side, right? So we're looking at widening the bridge enough so that one can run a small bobcat on it to be able to plow it. So the intention is that it can be plowable during inclement weather.
Slippery, salt, all that kind of stuff.
Sorry? working that through. But yeah, I think we have to be really, we have to be concerned about any impacts on the wetlands. So I think, we know that salt is an issue, so we're working with the Conservation Commission about what's the right thing to do on that. But yes, we've got some issues, so, we're working through them. Yep. Thank you.
My name is Ann Chang. I have a series of questions. From October to the time you have to make a decision, you have 120 days.
Mhm.
So you're going to have a town meeting first and a ballot question second, a town meeting second, a ballot question first? I mean, how do you plan to do this?
Great question. I'm going to ask Mary Brolin to talk about this one.
So the plan is to have special town meetings that are concurrent in Acton and Boxborough on December 10th. And then a week later, December 17th, we'd have a ballot vote also concurrent in each town.
I see. Okay.
And there will be more community forums, particularly in the fall, when we know the MSBA reimbursement rate, then we can give you real numbers. And so we'll bring that to the community and through forums before the town meeting so that you can be informed for your vote.
Okay. No, I was just thinking about the cost to the town for an election and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
I would like to know what the additional costs will be in construction for your net zero features.
I don't have a number for you today, but that is one of the things that we're working on. The state has also asked us for specifically that number. We'll know more when we get our estimate at the end of July.
So,
Add to that. So I think one of the important things, we're sensitive to trying to balance net zero with life cycle costs of the various systems. So Emily is actually working through her engineering firms as subcontractors to not only be able to provide a range of options to the building committee to look at, but also do an entire, annual operating cost analysis, maintenance cost analysis, and then total life cycle costs of various systems that we can use and the impact on the energy efficiency of the various systems so we can make informed decisions about that as a building committee. I think the other piece that we just talked about earlier is we need to look at the MSBA reimbursement rate impact, because based on the current project goal of triple net zero, we're being provided 2 extra reimbursement points on the project. So on $130 million of a project, or $120 million of a project, 1 percentage point is $1.2 million. So we also need to balance the impact of those 2 points on the various choices that we make, because sometimes it could come out in the wash a little bit.
okay, so what you're saying is this analysis will also include the ongoing maintenance costs of these things, which will come out of your operating budget?
That's correct. Yeah, any analysis, we need to consider the initial capital investment,
Yeah.
and as well as the ongoing operating costs on an annual basis and the maintenance costs over time.
So has anyone thought about a drop dead number that you can't exceed or anything like that?
Well, I think, right now, the issue with the drop dead number is before we see the cost of any systems, to put an arbitrary number on it is a challenge, because we might set a drop dead number in the base system that you could put in a building that meets MSBA guidelines could exceed it, and there's not much we can do. So what's happening right now is Emily's working with her team, and we'll be presenting 4 different options to the building committee for different systems that can go in, with an analysis of the energy efficiency of each system, as well as all of those operating and lifetime costs that I just spoke to.
I also want to mention that we're in a collaboration with Eversource and an organization called Seventh Wave, where they are for free consulting with us on the building project so that we can build in efficiencies from the beginning. And so sometimes there's actually no extra cost to do that, to make a more efficient building. And so they're helping and bringing that, their knowledge about that to our building project for free.
Okay, I have some more questions, but I
Yeah.
just want to say, you have a $120 million number out there already, so, I don't know whether you think that that's, well, you don't know whether that's a firm figure or not.
Yeah, but we have accounted for geothermal prices in that 120. And to address your earlier point, we tend to look at terms of payback. So instead of like a drop-dead number, it's more about how many years would it take for this system to pay itself back? So that different clients have different ranges that they feel
Okay,
comfortable
so
in.
that will be discussed in forums and all this thing.
Yes.
Now we come to your septic system. Do you have DEP approval for a septic system?
We do not have DE approval because it has not been designed yet.
Okay. What about considering adding to a town sewer?
We have considered this, and I think this is a larger question with the town and sort of the timing of the sewer project.
Uh,
The requirement to design to septic first?
Absolutely.
I know there's a requirement to design to septic first,
Okay.
but I was also thinking of looking at your little parking lot there and the fact that you're going to have a design for a leach field and thinking, wow, if you don't have to have that leach field because you're on sewer, you will have a few more parking spots and the poor people won't have to walk across the bridge from the Douglas School. Anyhow, so.
And so either way, in
Yeah.
order for us to figure out what the, and I always forget the term for this, which is avoided costs, we still need to go through the process of
Right.
designing the sewer system, this septic system.
Septic system,
Yeah.
yes.
So either way, we need to make sure that it would work on this site.
So when do you think, do you have any idea when you will get approvals or anything like that?
So typically, approvals happen in the phase after the town vote, because that's when the system is designed. to the point.
After the town vote.
Yes.
I should say that I'm on the sewer committee, West Acton Sewer, and we are thinking of coming to town meeting the same time you're coming for your approvals. I mean, this is not decided yet at all, but it's something that's perhaps in the works. So cooperation would be really great.
I agree.
Okay.
I have two questions. The first one is kind of a follow-up to the previous one about the boardwalk, the concerns with snow and things like that. Without really knowing whether it's feasible, but I'm just going to ask, I guess. Is it possible to think of something like a covered boardwalk? Something like that, or maybe it's not a boardwalk. Like
There are
some
advocates
other-
for a covered boardwalk.
I'm sorry?
There are advocates for a covered boardwalk. We have considered it.
Yeah, like a covered bridge, a really long one. And yeah, so is that something?
We haven't ruled it out. I think that we just need to look at the feasibility, and we know that whatever we do with the boardwalk, we have to work in concert with the Conservation Commission to ensure that we do not have any adverse effects on that land.
Boardwalk already exists. It's just building out what's there.
The other question is, and maybe this is clear to everybody else, what will happen to the two schools after the demolition? What's the plan for the current buildings for Gates and Douglas?
So I used the term decommission, but you guys can all call me out. They're going to be demolished. So what you're seeing here is a softball field. So on the Douglas side, there will be parking, and the plan is to provide a softball field. There are further studies about fast pitch versus slow pitch, so if you want to ask me those questions, I don't have the diagrams with me, but I can talk through that. So currently, as you know, there are sort of two smaller softball fields on the Gate side. So this would be a regulation one for softball. We will likely be keeping the existing playground that's on Douglas. So there's a small playground here, as well as sort of, you're seeing a half of a swing set and something here. The existing basketball courts will also remain. So that's the plan for the Douglas site. What you don't see here is there's actually a pretty significant grade change when you're on Douglas and sort of the land goes down. So a lot of times people will look at it and say, well, why didn't you put the softball field somewhere else? It really sort of fits in this area well, because there's a natural grade change at this area. So what will happen for the existing school? Well, the parking lot. One of the interesting things that we identified was there were wetlands in this area adjacent to the MBTA tracks that we were unaware of. So that sort of makes this area kind of a no-go build. But that doesn't mean we can't build it back up as greenery. And so we're also moving the school farther away from the tracks, which we think is a good thing, both for sound and for safety.
Thank you.
Hi, Aiden Smith. I'm another butter. Can you talk a little bit? Can someone talk a little bit about the overall schedule? I saw move in September 22. You talked about the septic summer of 20, but in terms of demolishing and doing everything else to get construction vehicles out of there, what does that overall schedule look like?
Yeah, so I can only talk about generalities. Actually, one of the things that we're working through today are defining what the various phases are. We know that one of the first things that will happen is the septic system. Likely, what we'd like to do is sort of do an early package, so perhaps next summer, if successful, to be able to get that in. And that we know that the building will take probably 18 to 20 months of construction. So once Gates is on the different sewage system or septic system that it needs to be on. Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. Oh, even better. Yeah. Then it's going to take about 18 to 20 months to build the new school. And then after that would be a remaining site work for that on both the Douglas and the Gates side. We do not have a contractor or CM at risk on board, right? And so a lot of times they're the experts to understand sort of where the site fence and all of those logistics happening. That will be coming, but that's the general plan, to do some initial site work, to build the new building. Once that building's online, to take the other two existing buildings offline and then do the site work for that project.
You know, maybe it's worth talking, what a two-phase, we chose the one phase, but it's the faster of the options.
Yeah, so that's a good question. One of the decisions that we made earlier was we looked at an option that could have been done in two phases. So in other words, we would build half the building and have Gates move into that building, and then build the second half of the building and then have Douglas move into that. We realized that that would have taken an extra 15 months, and it has impacts on learning. So it made a lot more sense to actually to have the construction done as quickly as possible to minimize the impact, because that would have perhaps had impact on another two, almost, in worst case scenario, almost 2 school years. So the goal is to get this project done as efficiently with less impact to you as an abutter, but also to students. So I misspoke. This is probably, we're estimating the building around 24 months, but that's pretty typical for a building of this size. Yeah. I wish I had more details for you, but we're working them through. I know.
One thing that will happen as we approach, next steps of this project, we would actually work with our project manager as well to reach out to all the abutters in the area and hold very specific meetings with each of the abutters to talk about impact, schedule, I assume working hours of the project, things like that, to make sure that there's really good communication going. So I don't want you to feel that you'll be left out of that loop.
I wanted to ask about the cost. Are you budgeting up to 120 million, or are you leaving a buffer to overcall, so I'm just trying to see, how are you going to stick to it?
Yeah, so right now we have a range of 120 to 130. As you know, the construction climate right now is volatile. We're seeing some things higher than others and others lower. This is a public bid job, so we also need to take into account public procurement laws and how that affects pricing, right? So we aren't, we still need to go through another round of estimating, and our goal right now is to get as much specificity in the project so that we get a really good estimate. And then we have a negotiation with the state of what their reimbursement would be. Once we get that, that number, that's a hard number, and that's a number that we have to deal with, and we'll know what that number is at the end of October.
Okay, and you've worked on other laws?
But, yeah, and actually, that's a really good point. So that number also includes 3 different types of contingencies: design contingency, owner's contingency, and construction contingency. And these are basically percentages that we know there might be unforeseen conditions, and that affects price, as well as there might be changes along the way, either from the design side or the owner side, and also unknowns. So there's a lot of thought to ensure that the price is as accurate as possible, but also has some buffer in it. And, you know, we recognize that this is your money. This is the town's money, and that is really important to stay within that budget.
Okay, and I guess will you help them have a priority list of certain things that really would be nice to have, but if the budget goes over, you might have to wait till later to do?
Absolutely. So that's part of the process. So when you start to get estimates, then you take a hard look at what things cost, and understanding whether does it affect the educational program? In other words, the learning of the kids, or is this sort of a nice to have? And then sometimes you have to make some tough decisions about that. But yeah, that's part of the process. Some people call it value engineering. Some call it value management. But you know, it's making sure that you have the best return on value.
Thank you.
So I want to thank you for joining us this evening. We will be doing many more forums, so look for them. Our website has a lot of information. This presentation will go up on there, as well as a link to the ActonTV recording. There's a survey, if you wouldn't mind. We'd love to have your feedback. If you're not a survey person, I have a blank card you can just write your thoughts down on. And any questions, there's also the building committee, our email chain is up on the website, so you can send us any questions. So thank you very much for joining us. Oh, there's a sign-in sheet as well. Particularly, we're thinking about doing like an email newsletter update, and so if you give us your email, we'll make sure we include you in on that. Oh, and we're going to have a table at Pfeiffer's Day in Boxborough, which is this Saturday, June 15th. There's a parade at about 11-ish, and the tables will be open from 12 to 5. We're going to have boards up of these designs and just other information for you to see. So please join us there, too. Thank you.